so much.
ACCC established its Clinical Research Award to recognize individuals whose research has significantly and positively impacted oncology patients, their families and caregivers, and to their communities. This year's recipient is Dr. Richard Shilski. Dr. Shilski is Professor Emeritus at the University of Chicago, having recently retired from his position of Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at Asco. He is also a past president of Asco and former board member of the Conquer Cancer, the Asco Foundation. Before joining Asco in 2013, Dr. Schilsky spent the majority of his career at the University of Chicago. Over the next nearly 30 years, Dr. Schilsky served in many leadership roles, including as director of the University of Chicago Cancer Research Center, Associate Dean for Clinical Research in the Biological Sciences Division, and as the Section Chief of Oncology, Hematology in the Department of Medicine. He is a highly respected leader in the field of clinical oncology and specializes in new drug development and the treatment of gastrointestinal cancers. His impressive experience and many accomplishments in both clinical medicine and clinical research reflect his deep passion for cancer medicine. In a recent interview with ACCC Buzz, Dr. Schilsky says that he is most proud of creating opportunities for other people to flourish in clinical research. He spent nearly 30 years on the faculty of the University of Chicago, where he taught scores of oncology fellows, many of whom have emerged as leaders in their fields. He takes pride in their accomplishments and his contributions to their successes. Upon his recent retirement from Asco, it was noted that he led the organization's effort to provide much needed high-quality clinical guidance to members desperate to provide excellent care to patients with cancer during the COVID-19 pandemic. ACCC is pleased to acknowledge this exceptional work by presenting Dr. Richard Shilski with this year's ACCC Clinical Research Award.
Thank you very much, Krista, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to join you today, and I'm particularly honored to receive this important award from the ACCC. Before I get into the meat of my presentation, these are my financial disclosures. Since I left Asco employment, I've started to do a little bit of consulting again with the companies shown on this slide. I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the companies that have been participating in the Asco taper study shown in the second bullet point: AstraZeneca, Bayer, Boehringer Ingelheim, Bristol Myers Squibb, Eli Lilly, Genentech, Merck, Pfizer, and Seagen, that are contributing both drugs and financial support to the study. Because of the taper study, I will make some brief mention of unlabeled or investigational uses of commercial drug products. My objectives for this brief presentation are to summarize recent findings of the taper study and to review strategies to help cancer practices recover from the global pandemic. And so my agenda will focus on the Asco Center for Research and Analytics that we formed during my time as Asco's Chief Medical Officer, the Asco taper study, and the Asco COVID-19 registry. But before I go further, I really need to stop and thank the ACCC Board of Directors for this wonderful honor, and maybe more importantly, to thank ACCC for your support of the Asco COVID-19 registry, for being among the first sites and organizations to participate in the registry, and of course for your wonderful collaboration on the Asco ACCC initiative on diversity in clinical trials. We're so excited about where that will lead. And again, my thanks to those ACCC sites that are participating in the taper study. So all of you are well familiar with Asco, but you may not be familiar with what I like to call the Asco Research Enterprise. And this is really a set of activities that were developed during the 8 years or so that I was working at Asco. And they've been organized into a new administrative unit at Asco that we formed in 2017 called Centra, or the Center for Research and Analytics. The activities comprise work on research policy and practice, the conduct of member surveys, and the collection of data in a data library that's accessible to ASCO members, the organization and conduct of pragmatic clinical trials, of which TAPER is so far the first and only example of a clinical trial conducted by ASCO, and then the development of mechanisms to collect real-world data, either through the CancerLink program that's been in existence since about 2012, or more recently through the Asco COVID-19 registry. Now, Centra has its own mission and vision, and its mission is to conquer cancer by generating, integrating, analyzing, and sharing oncology data to foster innovation in research and patient care. And Centra envisions a world where evidence drives innovation in cancer care, informs policy, and improves patient outcomes. ASCO's had a long time interest on clinical research, dating back decades now, and this has been organized in two broad activities focused on clinical trial methodology and research policy, conducted largely by the Cancer Research Committee. And on this slide, I just summarize at a very high level some of the work that's been done by this committee over the last 15 or 20 years on a number of important topics. But related to this has been also the work of the Community Research Forum, and I know many of you have participated in the Community Research Forum activities over the years. This morphed into the Research Community Forum a few years ago, and is focused primarily on clinical trial execution, development of workflows, development of toolkits, development of guidance to clinical trial participating sites for how to optimize their work in conducting clinical trials and producing high quality data. Probably the best example of our work on research policy and practice has been the work done in the last 5 years or so with Friends of Cancer Research and FDA on broadening eligibility criteria for clinical trials. And this slide just summarizes the first 6 papers that were published in a special issue of JCO back in 2014 on this topic. And more recently, there have been 6 additional papers published in Clinical Cancer Research, each one detailing recommendations on how to broaden or expand eligibility criteria for clinical trials. I'm very proud of this work. We think it's been very impactful. The National Cancer Institute has modified its protocol template to incorporate virtually all of these broader eligibility criteria requirements. And importantly, the FDA has issued guidance to industry recommending that commercially sponsored clinical trials also include broader eligibility criteria. The goal, of course, is to give more people the opportunity to participate in clinical trials, exclude fewer people from participation, and have patients in clinical trials who are more representative of the general population of patients who we treat in everyday clinical practice. Now, I mentioned the ASCO data library. When I came to ASCO in 2013, I recognized that ASCO had lots of data, but it was scattered all over the organization in different departments and different databases. It wasn't curated. It wasn't collated in any easily accessible way. So we brought it all together into one area in the organization known as the ASCO Data Library. You can see the link to it on this slide. And the types of data that are now available to ASCO members are shown here. And on the next slide, we have survey data of a number of different types of constituents. The COPI data from ASCO's Quality Oncology Practice Initiative is available for those who are interested in understanding the impact of quality measures on clinical performance. We have a database that has been provided by Tempus Labs to us that we are hosting, which is a glioblastoma database comprised of about 500 patients that includes comprehensive clinical and genomic data. And this is again available to ASCO members for research purposes. We have digitized every ASCO abstract presented at a meeting since 1964. And they are available and in fact have been downloaded by various researchers who are interested in tracking the evolution of cancer research over many decades. And finally, we will be making available data from the COVID-19 registry as that data continues to mature. Another thing that has changed in recent years at Asco is the development of what we call the research survey pool. Asco had a longstanding policy of not allowing Asco members to survey other Asco members for research purposes. There was a lot of concern about putting out too many burdensome surveys and asking Asco members to take time away from their work to complete those. But what we did was we established a mechanism whereby Asco members can actually opt in to participate in research surveys. And this is something that can be done at the time of annual dues renewal. In fact, you can't pay your annual dues renewal until you answer a question about whether you're willing to participate in the research survey pool. If you are, you then enter a pool of Asco members who can then be contacted about the potential to participate in a research project that is submitted by another Asco member. These are peer-reviewed, they are competitively evaluated. Asco will host up to 8 research surveys per year. And the process is that Asco works with the investigator to develop the survey, to deploy the survey, to collect all the survey data from the appropriate target populations, and then to collate all that data and send it back to the investigator for their final analysis. This program has been in place now since about 2019. You can see that there are about 7,800 Asco members, roughly divided between domestic and international, who have opted in so far to participate in the survey pool, and we encourage anyone who hasn't opted in to participate to consider doing so. You do earn FASCO points if you actually participate in a survey. And a number of surveys have been completed to this point. I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but I wanted to point out to you the variety of types of questions that are being addressed by these surveys, and also the fact that the response rate to these surveys from among those Asco members in the survey pool is actually quite good, on the order of 25 to 35% response rate. There are a number of surveys in progress and yet to be launched, shown on this slide. And we hope that this program will provide a useful service to those Asco members who want to do survey research, engaging other Asco members to help answer important questions in clinical practice. Turning to the TAPER study just briefly. TAPER, as you know, is a prospective phase 2 multi-basket, multi-center clinical trial. Its overall objectives are to learn from the real-world practice of prescribing targeted therapies to patients with advanced cancer whose tumor has a genomic variant that is known to be a drug target. But also, we think TAPER is an important vehicle to help educate oncologists about how to implement precision medicine in clinical practice. TAPER has broad eligibility criteria. It is meant to try to replicate the treatment of patients in routine clinical practice. And in fact, the eligibility criteria in TAPER comport with all of the expanded eligibility criteria recommended by ASCO and Friends of Cancer Research. It's open to patients with advanced solid tumors, B-cell non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and multiple myeloma, for whom no standard treatment options exist. TAPER enrolls patients as young as age 12 who have adequate organ function, broadly defined, and an ECOG performance status of 0 to 2. A genomic test is required to qualify a patient to participate in TAPER, and a variety of genomic tests are acceptable for that purpose. TAPER does not pre-specify what test must be done. We leave that to the discretion of the clinical site. But as long as the test is conducted in a CLIA-certified CAP or New York State accredited laboratory, it can qualify a patient to participate in TAPER. TAPER has both general inclusion and exclusion criteria, as I mentioned, but also treatment-specific inclusion and exclusion criteria once it's determined which TAPER-related drug a patient will receive. there may in some cases be more stringent enrollment criteria that have to be met. The primary study endpoint in TAPER is disease control rate measured as objective response rate using RECIST criteria, plus stable disease at 16 or longer weeks from the time of treatment initiation. So CR, PR, or prolonged stable disease qualifies as a response in TAPER. We also measure overall survival, progression-free survival, time on treatment. We're only capturing grade 3 to 5 adverse events and serious adverse events because all of the drugs in TAPER are already marketed and they all have a known safety profile. And we didn't want to burden sites with the extra data collection burden of collecting low-grade adverse events. So this is a list of the companies participating again in TAPER and the drugs that are being provided at no charge to patients. Those drugs that have an asterisk are drugs that were in the study at one time, but are no longer available in the study, primarily because of relatively low enrollment. But there are now, I think, about 22 drugs available in TAPER that comprise about 18 unique treatments because some of the drugs are used in combination. Most of the treatments are single agent, but where the drugs are indicated to be used in combination, they must be given in combination. So for example, nivolumab plus ipilimumab, trastuzumab plus pertuzumab, vemurafenib plus cobimetinib are all combinations in the study. And I'll mention that recently we've introduced some novel combinations. So we have a combination now of atezolizumab plus the subcutaneous formulation of pertuzumab plus trastuzumab, known as FSCO, that you can see on the Genentech line. We also have a very interesting combination noted toward the bottom of atezolizumab plus talazoparib, which brings together two drugs from two different companies in what we think is a unique and potentially interesting combination. We think of TAPER as a pragmatic trial for the reasons shown here. It has broad eligibility criteria. We allow a lot of physician discretion on what genomic tests to perform, the drug dosing, the dose modifications. We expect the physicians to follow the package insert for the drug with respect to starting dose and recommended dose modifications, but we leave the ultimate decisions to them. We employ minimum necessary data collection. We're trying to collect only the data that's necessary to address the objectives of the study and not burden sites with a lot of additional data collection. We allow for investigator assessment of response, but we do collect tumor measurements according to RECIST criteria to verify that response. We have extensive data validation procedures in place, but we do not do any on-site auditing or monitoring. And the protocol was reviewed by the FDA and is considered to be an IND exempt study, which makes it a lot simpler to conduct from a regulatory point of view. However, we do have, as I mentioned, specific inclusion and exclusion criteria, pre-specified genomic matching rules and standard response criteria, required evaluations, and a pre-specified data submission schedule for the protocol. Now, TAPER launched in March of 2016, so it has been ongoing now for about 5.5 years. It has registered, and by that I mean consented, almost 3,400 patients. Of those, almost 2,300 have actually enrolled in the study, meaning that they have met the clinical inclusion and exclusion criteria and also found a drug match on TAPER based on the genomic profile of their tumor. At the present time, there are 145 sites across the country in 22 states participating in TAPER. You can see their locations here. I'm happy to say that we hope by the end of the year, we're going to expand this to about 180 sites. And there still are more sites around the country that have expressed interest in joining the study, and we continue to bring them on as quickly as we are able to do so. A little bit of data from TAPER. This shows you the drugs in the study and the number of patients enrolled on each drug. And of course, this is driven by the protocol matching rules, along with the frequency of those target alterations in human tumors. But palbociclib, the nivolumab, ipilimumab combination olaparib, and pertuzumab, trastuzumab are the top 4 enrolling treatments in the study up until now. If you look at this by genomic alteration, and I realize this slide is a bit blurry and maybe a little bit difficult to see, but I'll just point out that, again, the most common occurring genomic alterations in the study are BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations, CDKN2A loss or mutation, ERB2 mutation amplification or overexpression, and high tumor mutation burden. And then you see this sort of long tail with a lot of rare mutations that are occurring at low frequency in various tumor types. We report out the results of the TAPER study by cohort, and a cohort is defined as the tumor type, the gene being targeted, and the drug being used. Cohorts can vary in size from 10 if it turns out to be a negative cohort, up to 28 if it turns out to be a positive cohort. And this slide just summarizes briefly the results of the 17 cohorts we've reported until now. Somewhat surprisingly, at least to me, we've identified 6 negative signals, but 11 positive signals. And many of these, of course, now are established FDA-approved indications, but they weren't at the time that the study began. And in many cases, our data supports an already FDA-approved use, but in a broader, more heterogeneous patient population. I don't have time in this short presentation to go through the results in any detail, but I would encourage you to visit the TAPER website, taper.org, under the News tab, and you can find a chart that looks like this. But for all of the reported results, there is a link to the abstract or the manuscript so you can explore the data in more detail. TAPER, I'm also proud to say, has inspired similar studies around the world. So in the Netherlands, there's a study called the DRUP study, the Drug Reutilization Protocol, that launched around the same time as TAPER, using a protocol very similar to TAPER, and has enrolled a large number of patients. In Canada, the Canadian Cancer Trials Group also used the TAPER protocol as a template for their CAPTURE study, and this is enrolling nationwide in Canada. And then you can see there are similar studies going on in Denmark, in South Korea, and in Australia. And these 3 studies, TAPER, CAPTURE, and DRUP, have agreed to collaborate in a data sharing protocol that allows us to combine cohorts across the studies to learn more quickly, particularly in cases where there are very rare genomic alterations. Finally, I'll mention the COVID-19 registry, which, as many of you know, launched in April of 2020 as part of Asco's response to the emerging pandemic. We felt it was important to try to learn as much as we could learn about the impact of the pandemic on cancer care as quickly as possible. At the present time, there are 77 practices with signed agreements. There's data that's already been collected on more than 4,700 patients entered by 65 practices. But I have to say again that we could not have gotten this off to a good start without the very robust support of the ACCC members. The goal of the registry is to capture and analyze practice changes and outcomes of patients with cancer who have a confirmed diagnosis of COVID-19. So patients must have a confirmed diagnosis of cancer and a positive SARS-CoV-2 test. To participate in the registry, they must have active cancer receiving treatment or be disease-free for less than 1 year and receiving adjuvant chemotherapy. The data collection scheme for the registry is shown on this slide. I won't spend any time going through it in detail, except to say that we collect data at baseline, 1, 2, and 3 months after the patient is enrolled, and then over a longer period of time, extending out to 2 years after the patient is enrolled, to try to capture information about long COVID symptoms and the long-term outcomes on cancer treatment and outcomes. We collect data on COVID-19 symptoms, treatments, outcomes, cancer status, cancer treatment, and cancer outcomes, and some data on the impact of COVID-19 on the organization of the practice and care delivery. If you go to the Asco website, you can view this dashboard, which is updated every week. And again, I won't spend a great deal of time on it, although I will point out a couple of interesting things. One of the things that struck my eye was that 70% of the patients with COVID and cancer in this registry are obese or overweight. Maybe that's representative of the broader US population. It seems a little on the high side to me. So maybe it's a reflection of the fact that obesity is a risk factor for COVID-19. And here you see the cancer types involved. Breast cancer is the most common type in the registry, followed by lung cancer and colorectal cancer. But interestingly, if you add up all the B-cell malignancies, so here's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, lymphoid leukemia, these have a high representation in the registry as well. And that is important regarding some of the outcomes that we have been observing. We have a paper now that has been accepted by JCO Oncology Practice and will be published soon. In fact, I think there's a preprint of it already available. And the most interesting thing in this paper is the relationship between COVID-19 and cancer mortality and age, particularly in patients with B-cell malignancies. It's easier to see that on this Kaplan-Meier plot. So the green line is patients over age 70. The red line is patients 61 to 70. The black line is patients under 60 or younger. Across all cancer types, there really is no association between overall survival and outcome. However, if you look at the patients with B-cell malignancies, it is clear that the patients who are over age 70 have far worse survival than patients 61 to 70 or patients 60 and under. We don't see this in the patients with metastatic solid tumors. So this is a highly vulnerable group of patients and one that we have to be very careful with if they're experiencing COVID during their cancer treatment. Finally, I'll just remind you that each year ASCO issues a set of research priorities for the nation. These are published as part of the annual Clinical Cancer Advances report that appears in JCO. And these are the research priorities identified for 2021. Some of these have been repeated over the last several years. The new one this year is to develop and integrate artificial intelligence and deep learning in cancer research. But you can see that there are a diverse array of priorities. Each of these is described in more detail in the actual publication. One of which, of course, that you're particularly interested and engaged in is increasing equitable access to cancer clinical trials. And again, we thank you for that. So I will just conclude by reminding you that there are many opportunities for ASCO members to participate in ASCO research. You can be a principal or co-investigator on a study, a site investigator at a taper site, for example, a lead or co-author on a research publication. You can be a research participant by opting in to join the research survey pool. And you can participate in many, many committees that provide oversight, guidance, and advice to how ASCO conducts its research activities. So I'll take this opportunity. Here's the award. Thank you all very much again. I'll summarize by saying I hope you recognize that ASCO has built a robust research enterprise that includes a clinical trials network, Manifest and Taper, a real-world evidence collection network in CancerLink, a prospective clinical registry with the COVID-19 registry, a capacity to survey members through the research survey pool, and then the ability to do data analysis, develop research policy, and improve clinical trial conduct through the work of Centra. I think ASCO is well positioned to contribute to generating the knowledge that conquers cancer, which of course is ASCO's new tagline. So thank you again very much for this wonderful honor, and enjoy the rest of your meeting.